Thank you for joining me today for the first of these studies in the book of the Judges. But before we begin, I would like to offer some reflections that I hope will help us navigate our path through this book. Now, Old Testament narrative books tend to finish rather like a good televised serial story. Just at the point where you and I are anxious to know what will happen next, the book comes to an end. Take Genesis, for example. The latter part of the book is woven around the promises God made to Abraham and his family, to Isaac and to Jacob. Little by little we see God working out his purposes, often in highly unpromising circumstances, until in the last chapter of Genesis we're brought to the point where we're asking, how then is God going to fulfill his plans? Our question is in fact reinforced by the description of Joseph's deathbed affirmation, where he tells Abraham's descendants, now living in Egypt, that, and I quote, God will surely come to your aid and take you up out of this land to the land promised on oath to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. But we're left suspended in midair. It's not until we turn over the page and begin to read the book of Exodus that the answer begins to unfold. And the book of Joshua is little different. The account of the initial conquest of the territory known as the land of the Canaanites is given up to the death of Joshua himself. But again, we're left anticipating the sequel. And once again, our anticipation is heightened by Joshua's final address, recorded in the last chapter of the book that bears his name. There Joshua reminds the people of their past experience of God's blessing. He reminds them of God's calling upon them, their redemption from Egypt, and their recent experience of the Lord's actions on their behalf. The people recognized the truth of what Joshua said and pledged themselves to the Lord and his guidance. What then can God not do with a people thus devoted to him? There remained, of course, much to be done. A comparison between Joshua and the early chapters of Judges indicates that though a general conquest had been successfully undertaken, pockets of resistance still remained. The war had been won, the decisive battles had apparently occurred. Effort might be required to secure final peace, but it now seemed achievable. So the people's pledge and their past experience of God promised well for the future, despite Joshua's warnings. And on this optimistic note of expected victory, the book of Joshua closes. One student of the stories we're looking at says, thus they had entered into the promised blessings of the inheritance, victory, prosperity, and happiness, which is the life God would always have his people lead. They were surrounded by enemies. Indeed, some of the enemies still lived within their boundaries. But if they would obey God and his commands concerning these enemies, they would have the power of the Almighty with them. Indeed, as another student notes, the momentum was not with their enemies, but with them. The Canaanites were terrified of the Israelites. And so we turn over the page from Joshua, and with high hopes begin to read the sequel, the book of the Judges.